James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, Honest Bob Jenrick, and Mel Stride. Those are the 6 contenders to be the next leader of the opposition. A job that is of paramount importance in the nature of British domestic politics. Desperate attempts by much of the media to inflate the importance of people who can go for decades not even getting elected, and when they do, they waltz into Parliament with a single-figure number of seats. The leader of the opposition is a profoundly important figure in a functioning democracy. There have been many times over the last few years where I have wondered quite deeply whether or not we are currently or were currently a properly functioning democracy, largely due, of course, to the role that the media has played in ensuring that the electorate is not informed. Can a non-informed or an uninformed or an ill-informed or a misinformed electorate truly be said to be delivering democratic decisions? I suppose 2016 is the best example. A number of people that voted for things that they were never going to get but truly believed that they were, to me at least, describes a democratic deficit, the likes of which this country has never seen before. But the leader of the opposition is a crucially important role. And given that the current government faces all manner of problems, mostly inherited, of course, but some, if not yet, then soon to be fairly described as of their own making, the role of the leader of the opposition in particular, and the opposition in general, in holding the government to account becomes absolutely essential. And yet, I couldn't give 2 figs who wins this leadership battle, and I do this stuff for a living. I recognise everything I just said to you, I mean to the bottom of my heart. It is supremely important. But looking at that list of names, looking at the political landscape in general, looking at the history of our parliamentary democracy, I can't quite get my head around the fact that I couldn't care less. I thought I would. I've even placed a bet on the result, which is, without giving too much away, 99.9% certain to fail. But it hasn't worked. It hasn't injected any excitement. I mean, Suella Braverman is not standing for the leadership of the Conservative Party, a politician who I feel individually embodies much of the malice and poison that has dominated right-wing politics in this country since probably 2015, 2016. You'd think there would be a sigh of relief or an exhalation of excitement attached to the fact that somebody as toxic and as unpleasant politically as Suella Braverman has removed herself from the field, leaving, and I'll run through the list again, James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, Robert Jenrick and Mel Stride. So the question that I'm building up to, as you've probably worked out for yourself by now, is why don't we care? Why don't we care? Is it a reflection of the individual inadequacies of the candidates, or is it a symptom of a broader malaise? But we'll get to that in a minute. What I want to touch upon first is the sort of polar opposite of this position. In many ways, the person I would like to speak to most today is the person who passionately cares. Tom had a caller earlier, a Remain voting, right of centre, patriot, for want of a better word, someone who cares about the condition of the United Kingdom and therefore can't really go along with what his party, as a lifelong Conservative, has become. So I want to create a sort of off-ramp, as it were, or a lane up the side of the switchboard for people who really do care. And it may be that I've got this completely wrong, and the side road will end up dominating the conversation. But my instincts are that you don't care either. And here's where I have to provide the focus, because, as I said 6 or 7 minutes ago, why don't you care is not a helpful or necessarily a fruitful question. I want you to really think about why you don't care. I want you to zone in on some or all of these people: James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, Robert Jenrick, Honest Bob Jenrick, and Mel Stride. Why don't you care which one wins? Especially if this is a party that you care about. I haven't had a conversation yet about the existential threat that the Tories find themselves in, partly because they've got racist liars to the right of them and they keep seeming to tack towards the racist liars, and partly because Keir Starmer, for good or for ill, has moved the Labour Party so far to the centre and therefore to the soft right that it's hard to know what space the Tory party inhabits moving forward. So that might be part of your analysis, and you may not have clocked it yet. The reason why I don't care, and this is why, in some ways, speaking to traditional Conservative supporters, it is important, because you may not have clocked it yet, but perhaps the reason why you don't care is because subconsciously you've arrived in a place where you don't think it matters. What are the big leadership elections of our era? I don't think I was going through a particularly anarchy period of my life because the chaos with which we've lived since 2010 was still on the horizon. But I remember when David Davis had been anointed as the next leader of the Tory party. And then they went to conference and David Cameron delivered a decent speech without notes, which everybody got very excited about. And he kind of, at the time it was reported as if he'd gone from nowhere to overtake the leader. But Michael Howard, the leader who'd lost the last election before that leadership race, had wanted Cameron for the job to the point where Cameron and Osborne had been put together as a sort of dream ticket, and Michael Howard, along with people like Daniel Finkelstein, now sits in the House of Lords, of course, and writes the column for The Times. They were very much the architects of that ticket. So the idea that something has come out of nowhere is often not true. A clean skin is missing from this battle, right? There's nobody there who you could say can successfully detach themselves from what has gone before. That might be part of it. But then you have the leadership election when Ed Miliband stood down, a leadership battle of such epic importance that in many ways it cleared the road for the chaos and the madness that followed by putting, whether you liked him or not, by putting at the head of the Labour Party a leader that most Labour MPs didn't really have much time for. So the failure of that administration to hold the government to account or to resist the excesses of Brexit and much of what followed is of huge national importance. So the role of leader of the opposition is part of this conversation. And the other part of it is the state of our nation, the state of our politics, what this says to us about where we are. And that's why I want to know, and forgive me, because the question is going to be vague, but I've fleshed it out a little bit. Why don't you care? And make it very personal for me. You should care. Even if you don't like the Tories, even if you think they're responsible for the worst period of government that the country has ever seen, even if you despise elements of their recent behaviours, like honest Bob Jenrick ordering that murals in a welcome centre for unaccompanied child asylum seekers be painted over lest they feel too at home in that otherwise dismal environment. So it may well be that you've sort of developed a deep dislike of this party, but you should still care about who leads the opposition. So why don't you? 03456060973. Andrew perhaps speaks for many of us when he writes, from what I see, all six are a bit rubbish. Some might be slightly better than the others, but it's an underwhelming choice. Well, how come, in that case, we have dedicated so much attention and headlines and newsprint to the antics of James Cleverly, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch in particular, honest Bob Jenrick, Tom Tugendhat, Mel Stride? You couldn't enter a studio in the run-up to the last general election without bumping into Mel Stride. Every studio in the country he had a season ticket for. There were moments where I thought he'd cloned himself in order to simultaneously appear on LBC, the BBC and Sky News. But I don't care. I don't care who wins, and I should. So if you're feeling really meta as we embark upon this exercise in ripping up the radio rulebook, why don't I care who leads the Conservative Party? I'd like to. But why don't you care? Why don't I care? And then, of course, conversely, Why does it matter to you? Why are you swimming against what I think is the tide of lethargy, apathy, ambivalence, disinterest, lack of interest? Why do you care? All right? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060973. And be as clever as you want to be today. So the simple, easy question, why don't you care? And then, why should it matter? Is a question of constitutional and national significance. And the fact that, for my money, to you, it doesn't matter, should probably be setting off alarms in corners of the country that often go unheeded.